assist us with our inquiry. We're extremely appreciative of that. Two things before we start. The first is, before we start to get it on record, from my left, would you state your name and any allegiance you have to any organization if you wish to, and if you want to make a short statement, please feel free to do so. Before you do that, the second is, we unfortunately have a debate going on just now where there are likely to be votes. And if the bell goes, unfortunately, some or all of us may depart temporarily, leaving you on your own, or some of us might stay behind. I'm sorry about that interruption if that happens, but unavoidable. Can I go with you first, Dr. Hunt?
So my name is Dr. Anya Hunt, and I'm the CEO of the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences, and I've got a background as a reporting forensic scientist in forensic chemistry, including fire investigation and footwear examination.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm Angus Marshall. I'm a lecturer in cybersecurity at the University of York, a visiting fellow at the Open University, and I'm also an independent practitioner in digital forensics and act as an expert witness roughly 2 or 3 times a month.
Thank you.
I've recently completed some research into the application of regulations and international standards within the digital forensics field.
Oh, good.
I'm Dr. David Shadell with Keith Borer Consultants. The company's been around since 1980. We have 46 members of staff, employees, 32 of which are forensic scientists or forensic engineers. In the last 12 months, we've provided over 2,300 reports, and most of those were for the criminal justice system. And most of those were at the request of the defence, although we did do some at the request of the prosecution.
Thank you very much. If I might start, and my question relates to the understanding of forensic science within the criminal justice system, in the judiciary, amongst the lawyers and the juries. And I'd like your comment on that, and also you might like to comment how it can be improved and what channels of communication exist or could be developed to facilitate that, and the criminal justice system being equipped with a robust, accurate and transparent forensic science. Any one of you can start.
Okay, so I think there is definitely disparity across the criminal justice sector when we look at the understanding and use of forensic evidence. There is a variety in the strength and the size of the evidence base in the various disciplines, and those disciplines actually continue to grow. The judgments have demonstrated that there has been a lack of understanding of the process in some scientific reasoning, and so there needs to be more of an appreciation of quality standards, and I think these limits that there is often limited understanding of the value and the strength that those quality standards give to us. I'm aware that the Royal Society and the Royal Society of Edinburgh has led a project initiated by the previous Lord Chief Justice, which is looking at the development of judicial primers. To date, I understand that there are 2 of those in the areas of DNA and gait analysis. And within the organisation, the society, there has been some misfeeling around the gate standard, particularly that perhaps not all the relevant experts were involved. But this is a key piece of work, and these primers, I think, have a place to play in educating lawyers and the judiciary, as well as the juries as well. As with regard to the robustness and accuracy and transparency of forensic science, I'm a key believer that the implementation of quality standards is key to that, and that all those that are delivering services through the criminal justice system should be accredited against the appropriate standards as laid out by the Forensic Science Regulator.
Thank you very much. Either of you have any other comment?
I'm talking about the channels of communication. I think they're there. I think they work slowly. In some cases, there seems to be deliberate obstruction, and we often have to go to the judge just to get permission to get information that we're normally entitled to, which just adds time to the process. So I think in terms of an improvement, that could see some improvement. And another area is to act on reasonable deadlines. When the prosecution has 6 months to compile a phone case, and then we're given a week, it's very hard to try and make that deadline match the amount of work that it's going to take to review that phone case. I noticed the Attorney General had made did a review of disclosure, which was very welcome, and hopefully that will address some of the issues. There's been talk about joint meetings of experts. That's been going on for several years now, and it's something that we find, generally speaking, when there's an issue between forensic scientists, it is promoted, and very much the forensic scientists, I know at least, very much welcome it, and it does happen often. I think that's been a vast improvement in the recent years when it comes to forensics and the criminal justice system. Robust, reliable and transparent forensic science. When I look at forensic science and the way that forensic science differs from normal science, in forensic science you've got to first of all choose the exhibits that you need to have analysed. They then have to be analysed, and then you have to interpret the results in the context of the case. And each of these steps invariably involves different people. But if it's all done by competent people, then you have a competent result ultimately that goes into the system. The areas where we see problems is where there's any weakness in each of those steps, and then you end up with a weaker report, a weaker strength of evidence. In the worst case, of course, it can be misleading. And then with transparency, I'm just going to mention the SFR1s, the streamlined forensic reports. They're supposed to speed up the judicial system when it comes to forensic science, but I would say they're not transparent. Even having the word forensic in the title of a SFR1 can be seen as something that is non-transparency, because they might be written by a person who's an administrator and not even by a forensic scientist. We see that in the SFR1s there may be critical information that the defence needs to know, might not even be mentioned in the SFR1. And although they're not supposed to form part of the key evidence coming into a trial, we routinely see the SFR1s in trial, but not the SFR2, which is what's meant to replace it if the case goes into a trial.
Okay, Lord Fox.
Well, yeah, very briefly, I was interested here, Dr. Hunt, that there's only, 1.5 primers in existence. I got the impression from a previous witness that these primers were up and running and active. I might have misunderstood that evidence. So how long does it take to deliver one of these primers? Who's actually accountable for them? And clearly they're not sufficient in their own right.
I personally think that the rate at which they've been delivered by the Royal Society and the Royal Society of Edinburgh has been incredibly slow. I think that one of the difficulties, particularly when we go to Mr Marshall and digital forensics, is things change so quickly. By the time these are produced, they will in fact be out of date. My understanding to date is that there is only these 2 primers that are in existence, and actually that work has taken a number of years to get to the stage it has. And I think potentially by engaging more effectively with forensic science practitioners and the Royal Society, there is an opportunity to get that work carried out more quickly and then provide primers to support the... So
to be clear, there is not a library of primers to deliver this situation?
Not to date,
Thank you very much.
Understanding. So the primer is a piece of written work that outlines the core aims of the method and identifies maybe some of its shortfalls and the risks, but it's there to guide the court as a whole through the process to give them a better understanding.
So there are primers for every discipline or is it?
This is the aim, that in longer term that will in fact be the case.
Oh, I see. So at the moment it's quite
it's
covering
small,
everything. But,
yeah.
But in the future it might be more specific.
Absolutely.
Okay, can I move on to Lord Caker, then Barrister Neville Jones?
Thank you. I just want to come back to this point about these agreed forensic reports. And the point, if I heard it correctly, that the choice of the material to be analysed is a choice. Not all material will be subjected to forensic analysis. How is that choice made? By whom? By the prosecution? Is the defence aware of all of the material that might be forensically relevant that isn't being subjected to that full process and analysis, number one? And then number two, is there anything else that won't be known to both parties where the assumption of the court is that everything that should be known is known, if you understand that, and has been shared?
The decision tree, as you go down an investigation, you can't collect everything. There's always decision right, starting with really the scenes of crimes officer, the officer in charge of the case. There should be meetings about what evidence should be collected at any given stage. And then a lot of the police forces use a strategy to a forensic advisor to determine which items may go for external examination or not. But anything that has been captured as an exhibit at that stage should at least be either listed as an unused exhibit or at least has a report that's been generated as a result of being analysed. And that is always listed, and usually you go through, one of the things I would do is go through the unused material to see what the exhibits are out there. But even the defence team may have already highlighted certain things that they consider relevant, which they don't think have been analysed. And so then we look at getting those analysed. And sometimes you find that they have been analysed, but there's just not been a statement produced. That occasionally happens. In terms of the disclosure, again, generally what's done is, in the trial bundle, you will get the entirety of what's been done along with the unused material. And you have to be careful to go through the unused to make sure there's nothing of relevance there. If you think things are missing, then it's a matter of requesting it. It may be that you want to see a scientist's notes or something that the fingerprint department have done, and you can then request that through the normal channels and get it that way. I wouldn't necessarily expect every little detail in a case, so every email, every handwritten note or notes that are generated by the scientific personnel who did the work. I wouldn't necessarily expect to see those, but they are available on request.
Okay. Barrister Neville-Jones?
I just wanted to follow up one point that, Chairman, that Dr. Chilton, statement you made just right at the beginning, and you mentioned obstruction. Can you give us a feel for what you mean by that?
Well, for example, I'll take cell site as an example, but it applies to other areas. The police will get raw data from the network, and then they'll use that to create a report. We'll get a copy of the report, and we'll ask for the raw data, which they've used to create the report. What we'll get is something else that we can't use, and then we go through this process several times. And sometimes we're just told we're not allowed to have that. And then in the worst cases, I'm not going to say it happens all the time, but it does happen. The worst cases, we just have to appeal to the judge to say we need this information, and our lawyer, the instructing solicitor will go forward and make that request through their channels, and normally it'll be granted, and then we'll get the information that we need.
What would be the basis of the refusal?
I think some of the people involved are taking great pains not to release evidence that they believe sensitive, and therefore they may be upsetting people's rights in the process. I think the GDPR also has had a knock-on effect with that. So people, I think part of it is people just being very careful and showing perhaps over-diligence, when in fact there's an also a basic need for us to have the data for legitimate purposes. So it's just really about bridging that gap. And with the right channels in place, it can be quite straightforward. And sometimes it's as simple as, can we just have permission to talk directly to the individual who's controlling it, and they just need permission to provide us information. If we bridge it that way, quite often then the whole thing just unravels and we get the information very quickly.
There is, of course, the data regulator, I mean, if necessary.
I think because of the way we work through the legal channels, so we put the instruction that our request in with the solicitor, then it goes to presumably counsel, and then if necessary it goes through the court at that point. And sometimes counsel can work it out between them. I think as long as there's assurances that we're doing it for the right reason, but it can take weeks sometimes in a system that's already pushed for time.
Thank you.
Lord Hunt.
So my question is about the Chartered Society, which I'm interested in, having been president of another society myself. So how does your society support the broad spectrum of the forensic science community? And I just wanted to ask, for forensic science, we keep hearing it in terms of analysing an event, but presumably some of the science of that is to do with prevention of crime, and I just wondered if that is included in the definition of forensic science, and whether that your society is also helping that aspect of the prevention of crime?
So if I address the first question first, really about addressing the broad spectrum issue, I think that it's clear that the forensic sciences are a very diverse mixture of sciences, and that actually presents both an opportunity and also a risk. It's clear that many of these disciplines have only a handful of scientists, and therefore as we look towards ensuring standards, it's incredibly difficult when many of these disciplines don't naturally fall in the same category of acceptance as others. The Society has been able to engage better with some of these disciplines than others, depending on the keenness of individuals to take that forward. We continue to do an awful lot of work in increasing knowledge and understanding in the use of quality standards, and of course this is truly cross-disciplinary. To answer the question with regard...
Sorry, you say cross-disciplinary, but it's still all forensic, is it? Or you mean it's completely different? It's chemistry, biology...
But of course, good science is at the heart of excellent forensic science. So for the science to be correct and to be validated and verified, it's good science. And then it's the way that is applied and the extra rigour that is required to make it acceptable within the CJS that makes it a forensic science. But at the heart of all forensic science, irrespective of the discipline, should be good, high quality, defensible science. In the question with regard to crime prevention, then I think if we look at the value of forensic science...
I'm sorry to have to stop you mid-sentence, but those noble lords who need to go to vote, please do so.
Proceeding is currently suspended. The 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 proceeding is...
I stopped you mid-sentence, so please continue.
So, from memory, the mid-sentence was looking at the use of forensic science as a crime prevention tool. Recently, just a few weeks ago, the Society ran an event that looked at the value of forensic science and noted that this is extremely difficult to quantify because there is clearly a deterrent value in forensic science. The general public do have some understanding of the discipline and do see it as a deterrent. There is, of course, the use of huge amounts of technology. One that I could name is smart water, that you see on the back of security vans, so that money and goods from these vehicles are covered in the smart water, and the offender then gets this onto them. It's largely indelible, and it can be detected by forensic means. And this has come around as a result, really, of a change and a development of a forensic technique. There's also GPS devices, etc., etc. I think there is huge potential in educating particularly young offenders on the difficulty to enter a crime scene and not leave crime traces behind, thus increasing crime prevention. And this is something that the Society has been engaged with in the past, but not so much now. And of course, we've got to think of CCTV, which was originally introduced, I believe, into my home city of Wolverhampton in the 1980s as a deterrent, but has now also got huge value in policing from the point of view intelligence and evidential purposes. I think the Society could certainly do more than it does.
If I might just add to that, I think the Chartered Society has something of a problem in the way it is perceived by some other disciplines. Exactly. If I think particularly of the computing community, digital forensics is seen very much as a niche, but in terms of things like crime prevention, there are broader lessons that we could be learning from those who investigate crime, not just within policing, but in other fields as well, and applying those lessons to actually make digital technology more amenable to examination and the preservation and recovery of evidence. At the moment, the whole concept of forensic readiness is massively underrepresented in the computing community, and it means that new technologies are being produced every day which are inherently difficult to recover anything useful from to use as evidence.
Lord Baroness Young and then Lord Oxborough. No.
Baroness Young first then. Baroness Young and then.
It's really a question for Dr. Hunt. I mean, do you see your organisation as a kind of cheerleader for forensic science? And if so, you know, probably summarising slightly, but the impression we've been getting is of a set of services that are pretty well in crisis. And I was interested to know whether that is something that your society's been campaigning on.
So we are the professional body representing forensic sciences. We gained a Royal Charter in 2012, and as I said, it is difficult because of the very broad array of disciplines to engage effectively with everyone. We have 3,000 members, and we represent those members in their role within the criminal justice sector. Obviously, some of those are outside of the UK. Something that we are supporting is the role that quality standards have across the criminal justice system. And I think one of the other questions, whether you wish me to answer it now, is about championing forensic science quality standards, how that affects each and every person, whether part of a larger organisation, a police force, a fire service, or a small or micro business. So I totally agree that forensic science is in crisis. I think that there's been a huge amount of austerity and funding cuts affect every part of the discipline. And the Society aims, as a not-for-profit charitable organisation, to try to support every individual that is a member and others that aren't in the challenges that they face. So I think cheerleader perhaps underplays it. I'm quite happy to speak about some of the work that we're doing now, if you wish, or we can come back to that.
No, I was really just interested in whether you see it as your role to stand up and say this thing is actually broken and the bigger system needs to be fixed.
I think it's my role as it is others, but yes, the system is broken and yes, it does need to be fixed. I think if we look at other professional bodies for things like law, for example, in the fact that the professional body has a much greater role to play in that, and I think as forensic science and the forensic sciences mature, then the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences should be in a similar position to that of law and medicine.
Okay. Lord Thomas.
I wanted to ask you one thing about the accreditation and standards of individual practitioners.
Yep.
What does the Society do to ensure that its members are initially accredited and competent? And what is the ongoing review? Because professional bodies have to address this now.
So our professional body, again, just picking up from where we started there, is a little different to those of law and medicine, for example, in the fact that there is no requirement that forensic practitioners are members of our society. So we have different levels of membership and there is different requirements depending on that. Within the last 2 months, the Society has introduced a Chartered Forensic Practitioner programme, and the aim of that is to measure excellence in expert witness skills, but also in their overall competency within their chosen specialist field. So there is a move at the moment, as you will be aware, around the requirement for all organisations that are doing work for the criminal justice to be accredited, and part of that accreditation looks at the individual competencies of individuals within the organisation. Currently, the Society doesn't have a role specifically around that, but we're looking to support the forensic science regulator in some of the work programmes that we do.
So being a member doesn't give you a qualification that's reviewed?
No, not currently, but my view would be longer term that if we look to other professions, that there should be accreditation in place for organisations and that the professional body would have a role around qualifications of individuals.
Lord Oxborough.
Yeah, looking a little forward, there are quite big expectations for the Transforming Forensics programme. How do you, each of you, from your individual perspectives, view this? Do you think that this is likely to produce many of the changes that need to be forthcoming, in your view?
Do you want to go first? Yeah.
The Transforming Forensics programme, I don't think it really affects the work we do directly, and it seems to be a programme that the police are following, and particularly looking, well, the initial step seems to be looking at their fingerprint and digital forensics. My concern really with that programme, there's already been a large shift of funding away from the external providers, which to all intents and purposes are the traditional forensic labs, to internal forensic provision within the police, so strengthening things like fingerprints and the digital forensics. So my concern with promoting that programme as it is, we're going to see a continued shift of funding away from one service to the other, when in reality what we have is an expanding amount of forensic evidence. This whole digital arena has come about in recent years in addition to the work that we need to continue. So it's not as if it's one pot that needs to be shifted from one area to the other. The actual cost base for the whole thing needs to expand to accommodate all of the areas.
Who has the responsibility for, how shall I put it, project managing this operation?
Well, I think it has to have some kind of oversight that's necessarily independent from the police, that also looks at the criminal justice system as a whole and their needs in terms of the evidence. So I think having it directed by the police, the worry would be that there would be a temptation to try and keep as much of it in-house as possible, which I'd understand that, but I think someone needs to look at it to say, yes, but we do need a certain amount, and this is how much we need to continue with the traditional forensic work that's critical to the system.
Can I ask you both, to other people, how you feel on this?
I find it difficult to give a response. I've tried to engage with the programme and found it largely uncommunicative, to be honest. I would echo Dr. Schudel's concerns that it is predominantly policing-led, and particularly in the digital world. We need to bear in mind that the techniques that we use are used by other agencies beyond the police. Trading standards, for example, have a lot of digital evidence usage, and they are a very neglected part of the community. They have virtually no support at all. We also have strong presences in places like Financial Conduct Authority, Serious Fraud Office, and even the NHS. And we have a lack of coordination at that level.
Okay. Okay.
If I can just add to that as well, I mean, my understanding was that the programme specifically had 3 work areas. I would agree with my 2 colleagues that it is largely police focused. The 3 areas being Fingerprint Bureau, modernisation, looking at digital forensics, and also about, it's contagious. Also looking at the ISO, the implementation of ISO standards. In my opinion, it really is too little too late, and probably the programme is 5 years too late to actually make an active input. And I think when we look at the huge challenges around all 3 of these areas, then realistically I'm not convinced that the resources are effectively divided within the TF programme to deliver on those in a timely manner as would be required.
I moved round
It's colder this
because
side.
there's air conditioning's on that side, which is possibly why some of my colleagues are sneezing.
I'll move on to Baroness. The sneezing is on this side, though. But Baroness Neville Jones.
Thank you. We touched earlier on the whole question of the access of the defence to forensically based, science-based evidence. A number of witnesses have suggested to us that it isn't exactly a level playing field between prosecution and defence when it comes to access to that kind of works. For instance, low rates of pay, in effect, for legal aid, for access to defence work, forensic work for the defence. I'd be interested to have your experience, whether you agree with this general proposition, what you think the causes are, and what would you like to see done about it?
I think the actual services that are available to both. When it comes to, from our perspective, DNA, handwriting analysis, cell site analysis, drugs, toxicology. There are services out there that could give the same service to the prosecution as they would to the defence. Been my experience anyway. I don't think there's any real restriction on getting things done, other than, of course, finding the right price for that service. In terms of the actual legal aid provision, which is a lot of our source funding, there's 2 things to really talk about. One is the current system for legal aid is based on the lowest quote, and that's regardless of quality, and that's regardless of whether even if it's fit for purpose. If 2 estimates are submitted, they go with the lowest one. And I suppose more fundamentally, a lot of the work we do, such as DNA, fingerprints, the digital arena, the legal aid rate now is less than what it was in 1999. So we're really struggling.
You mean in monetary terms?
Yes, the hourly rate that we're allowed to bill legal aid is less than 1999.
So in real terms, much lower.
Yes, there's been no index-linked inflation to the actual running costs and the awards that legal aid give. And so we really struggle with that. We're running very, very lean. Some of our areas are losing money, but other areas are doing a little better. But it's very, very difficult, particularly when you're trying to hire people, because we just can't offer the salaries that people are coming to expect, particularly in things like digital, where they can walk into a non-forensic market. I'm going to say people don't go into forensic science for the salaries. We all do forensics because we love forensics. But there's a point where if they can get double the salary working for a large digital company that does, private work that's non-forensic related, then people just have to look at the numbers, and that's the way they're going to go.
So what's the effect of all of this, in your view?
I think we're just struggling ultimately we're struggling just to keep going as a business. And then when you add the level of accreditation that's becoming to be expected upon us, then it's financially just going to be a massive hurdle to overcome to try and keep going with a business model like this where the funding's just so tightly reined in.
Is the problem affecting the administration of justice in your view?
Yes, it is. I think, well, we're still going, but I think if it keeps on going like this, we've already seen several companies on the brink of bankruptcy or have gone out of business. And particularly from our perspective, we're part of the checks and balance of the system. And if you look at quality as a whole, because this is a lot of talk about quality, I would argue for the criminal justice system, one of the quality markers is we don't send someone innocent to prison. And part of that quality system are the checks and balances that experts like ourselves put into that system. If the current market keeps going, that more and more people go out of business, at the one hand, although you're perceiving a quality increase by further accreditation and we'll make it statutory and you have to do this, but then people are going out of business. On the other hand, you might actually be losing those very people who provide the checks and balances in the system. And then you actually decrease quality at the other end. So that it's really a balance.
Lord Griffiths, I was just going to ask, quite apart from people who go out of business, if you just look at the quality of your product, if people are paying increasingly, as you've said, a lower real price for that product, presumably the quality of that product, even if it's in business, has actually been going down.
Well, we're an ISO 9001 company, and we also have 2 ISO accreditations, the 17025. We have a very high quality model.
But if you looked across the sector, as opposed to just yourself as an outstanding example,
I think when we're looking at the work that's coming out by the prosecution, it's getting leaner and faster, and as a result has less detail, and then we find more problems within it. If we do, I wouldn't say more, but we as a service, we've been doing this since 1980. There's always the cases that come along where you find an issue, and that's going to keep on going. I think in terms of quality, the work that's done to a quality standard is maintained at a quality standard. And I think the work that was done 20 years ago by the prosecution labs, for example, is still at the same kind of level. There's just less of it. And the work that we're producing is at the same quality level. It's just we're having to do it in shorter and shorter deadlines. And we're just, it's creaking, the system's creaking at this point.
But if you're doing it in shorter and shorter deadlines, I mean, doesn't that have an effect on quality?
Absolutely. If the 3 givens are quality, turnaround time and cost, then it's impossible actually to get low cost, high quality, fast turnaround of samples. That's just not possible. It's impossible. And currently, the current rates that are paid by the LAA for forensic science are too low to enable quality standards to be adopted. I think we need to be mindful that many of the companies who are carrying out LAA funded work are small and micro businesses and sole traders, and therefore the total cost of quality to them is a higher proportion of the turnover than it is for larger companies. And if we expect, as we should, that companies large and small have the same high quality expectations, then there must be equity in the quality, and therefore the LAA rates need to be updated to reflect that, to ensure that the quality continues.
Okay, Barrister Neville Jones, then Lord Fox.
My Lord Chairman, may I just add a point about the checks and balances? Apologies. One of my frustrations as someone who has recently predominantly done prosecution work is that I very rarely see a defence expert. Historically, I used to spend a lot of time sitting outside the court with colleagues from the profession agreeing technical points, and that saved a lot of time in court. Now, I can't remember the last time I saw a defence report. I can't remember the last time I had that sort of conversation. I am spending far more time in the witness box, taking up the court's time on technical material that counsel is not confident with, that the jury is getting bored with, and frankly I think is often adding to confusion because of the way it's being presented.
And that's because the defence can't afford you? Or why is it that...
For some reason defence experts are not being instructed, are not being used effectively.
Well, I think part of our problem is we're turning work away because we we're maxed out to try and keep going in this current market.
Oh, I see. That actually was the point I really wanted to raise with you, which is if, by definition, you say that you keep up your standards, but you're doing less work, and the number of cases coming to court has increased over time, it's not going down. So is it right to conclude that there are an increasing number of cases where actually forensic evidence which could be provided isn't being provided?
Mathematically, that would make sense. Personally, I've no way to know it. But we do turn work away, I just don't know where it goes.
It's likely, is it? Is it likely?
I mean, it does seem very difficult to understand how else...
It certainly seems likely to me that it is not getting the independent scrutiny from the defence side that it deserves.
Okay. Lord Fox.
Well, we've kind of started to get into the area of the role of the market, and there's two forces at play here. One was the creation of the market, and the other has been the reduction in the budget available to spend on forensics, I think. And so if we can just decouple slightly now the budget to the market, how do you see the role of the market? Indeed, has the market itself been responsible for driving your prices down in order to win the work? You have done it to yourselves by bidding lower and lower in order to secure the work, or is there some other force going on? And the final point really is, how does this pan out for the future? You've already alluded to fragile companies, but also the investment in future research and investment in future techniques.
Well, it comes back to what I started with the legal aid rates being 1999 prices. We can't just double the number of hours by magic because we need to make the ends meet. The work takes the number of hours that it takes to do. So what we're actually
So does the legal aid rate determines what the prosecution pays as well?
No, I think that's a...
Well, that's what that... So therefore, most of the work you've said you're doing for the prosecution, not for the...
No, I'm doing mostly for the defence.
Oh, mostly for the defence, right. But the prosecution rates have also fallen substantially as well. So I mean, there's no doubt the rates have gone down, and in the case of the defence, it's been pushed down by legal aid. But in the case of the prosecution, is it the market that has created that, or is it simply they won't give you... I mean, what's the dynamic here?
Competitive tendering.
Perhaps you can help me.
Could I just add something to that? On the one hand, you have the market, there is freedom to determine the price. On the other hand, you have the police, who are subject to budgets. So if those budgets are cut, that would have a comparable effect in the market to less legal aid. So in a way, there has to be, I think,
I'm trying to work out which is pulling and which is pushing.
I think there is a perception that technology is advancing, and as technology advances, automation and speed increase, therefore prices should fall. And to some extent, for what we would class as volume examinations, things like drug testing, DNA processing, basic scientific processes, that may be true. But when it comes to specialist services, where the automation isn't possible, it still takes the same amount of time, probably even longer in the digital field because of increasing storage capacity. But the available budget has been shrunk. And I certainly know that when my services are required, behind the scenes there is a long debate about who's actually going to pay for my services, whether it's coming from police budget or CPS budget. And that introduces extra delays. And I am routinely now under pressure to find a way of cutting the price.
So what I'm trying to get to is, if there was a more benign financial settlement, in your view, would the market work, and does the market work? So in other words, is the market being ruined by the finances, or is in its sense also the market dysfunctional inherently anyway?
I think the level of dysfunctionality has massively increased as a consequence, a direct consequence of austerity.
I don't doubt that.
And so, therefore, if we go back to the three preface of quality, turnaround time and money, if you want it done quicker that will cost organisations, even with automation, it will cost them more. And are those turnaround times realistic? Are they being utilised by the police for crime prevention purposes? And if they're not, then maybe there is an opportunity to actually take the foot off the gas and not have things produced quite so quickly.
So all you need is money and everything will be all right, is that what you're saying?
No, that's not the case. But I certainly think it would help, given that we want to make sure that the United Kingdom remains to be at the forefront of forensic science now and well into the future, and cutting corners financially can only go to damage that.
Can I just ask, you said that dysfunctionality has increased with budget cuts, and you suggested there's an intrinsic dysfunctionality in a market system. I wonder if you could just expand on what that dysfunctionality is.
Well, certainly if we look at quality standards, so currently the forensic science regulator doesn't have statutory powers, and therefore the level of compliance amongst organisations, police forces, small, medium-sized businesses and the large providers is not the same. And probably the biggest effect of that would be that people don't have the money. There is an expectation within police forces that quality is done as an addition to the standard day job. There has been cuts at police at all levels, and then there is...
But we've established that it isn't just the money. So I said, if you get all the money, you said it's still a problem. So what is still a problem, even if you had all the money?
No, I didn't say that it'd still be the problem. I think that there would be a requirement then that the money is used to effectively manage across all sectors the quality, to ensure that the quality is there. That would enable more resources in the terms of people and bums on seats, and also to not cut corners on maybe availability of expertise, etc.
The problem is that the money is going down while the casework is going up.
That bit I get.
The capacity simply isn't there for the price that people are willing to pay. It is not a real market.
But if there was if there was a regulator with statutory backing, do you think that problem could be solved?
Personally, I think that the only way to get equity of quality across all provision for prosecution and defence is to enable the forensic science regulator to have statutory powers as soon as is workable.
You look less convinced.
I'm afraid I completely disagree. Having done some work looking at how the regulator standards have been implemented, while they are good in theory, the actual implementation is fundamentally flawed, and the regulatory regime we have at the moment is putting a veneer of respectability on some disciplines that they cannot provide evidence for.
Such as?
I'm going to pick on my own profession because that's the one I've looked at most closely. We have a situation in the digital world where bodies are being accredited to provide digital forensic services, but they are not actually providing evidence that those services are correct. They cannot produce that, and it is a fundamental flaw. It's a solvable flaw, but right now, if we had statutory powers for the regulator and the regulations were enforced, I think we would be putting criminal justice at risk.
Can I just clarify that in one respect? I mean, if we took the case of motor mechanics repairing cars, you were saying that here are people in this area of digital science. If they were in the equivalent position of people repairing cars, they would really be incompetent.
I'm not saying that anyone is incompetent. I'm not saying that anyone is doing anything wrong. What I'm saying is that they cannot provide the evidence that they are right, and that's what the regulations require. But the implementation of the regulations has moved away from that. And it's bad wording in some of the guidance documents that have come out of the regulator's office that have allowed that to happen.
I disagree. I think if forensic science provision, both at the crime scene and at the laboratory, look to align themselves to ISO 17020 for the crime scene and 17025 for the laboratory, and implement those in line with internationally recognised documents such as ILAC G19, and fully implement them in line with the forensic science regulators' codes of practice, practice and conduct, then this is a recognised model that is used in other industries for laboratories and for inspection. Is it wrong that asbestos testing, for example, to set yourself up as an asbestos tester, you must be accredited to 17020, but to set yourself up as a forensic scientist who goes and takes samples from scene, there is no such requirement?
That is exactly my point.
Get into, I disagree with you, you disagree with me. I think we'll get the gist that you don't agree with each other.
I think Dr. Shudel was just about to say something. Sorry, can we just...
Mr. Marshall's disagreement. Is it that you think that the forensic regulator is not relevant here, or that you think the powers that or if it were to have statutory powers, it would operate those powers in a way that is in a wrong way?
I have long been a cheerleader for the regulator. I wholeheartedly agree with the principle of accreditation. My problem is that the way things are working at the moment in forensic science, the accreditation is based on the customer's expression of what they want. If we look at other disciplines which use the same standard, they are rooted in fundamental science, and they show that the method is correct first, and then choose that method based on the customer requirements. It's the way the regulations have been interpreted.
Right. Baroness Young, and then you can move on to your question.
Well, I just think, coming from the perspective of ourselves, a lot of the work we do is review work from an expert perspective, but we review work that's been done and then in the context of the entire case, and we form an opinion, and it's very difficult to accredit an opinion. You could have two people working at the same accredited lab using the same methods, and they can have a difference of opinion because it's based on individual education, training and experience, as well as what information they've actually seen. So I think my worry with statutory powers, if it comes down to, well, you can't give an opinion in court because you're not accredited, then I think you'd see a lot of small providers would just have to say, well, we can't do this anymore. But then you're losing, back to the quality system in its whole, you're losing some of the provision that you have as checks and balances from those experts who have been doing this for many years, including myself, many years, putting a positive input into the criminal justice system, and yet there's a blanket of ISO 17020 and 17025
we'll come to that in a minute.
Has been chosen to put on that profession.
Okay, Baroness Young.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression I get about ISO 17020 and ISO 17025 is that they're very much process accreditation standards. They're standards that are about processes rather than about people. Is that right?
Yes.
Therefore, if we look also to the other documents that I mentioned, so ILAC G19 and the Forensic Science Regulators Codes of Practice and Conduct, they look at processes and the competency of the individuals that are working within their processes, and the training and the monitoring of that competence is key to the attainment of that accreditation. So it's not simply process.
So in terms of Dr. Schull's comment about expert witnesses giving an opinion, if they're accredited, that would give them a good housekeeping seal of approval in order to be an expert witness.
I think it could be used for that reason, but in reality you can demonstrate competence as an expert in many other ways, including individual certifications, for example. And yet there's not really been a consideration of that in the process. You have to do 17020 or 17025. And at the end of the day, like I said before, you can't accredit an opinion. And so you could have two people, we've seen it before, two people working at the same lab have a difference of opinion as to what the evidence might mean. We're trying to reconstruct the past as experts. Hopefully one of us wasn't watching the crime when it happened, and you're trying to reconstruct what happened. So you can have two differences of opinion, and I think that's actually a benefit. I would think the CGS would want to know that there's a difference of an opinion between two experts, because they may have a shelf load of information that neither of the experts have seen that might actually help them decide which one of those two opinions may be the right answer. Of course, both of them are wrong, which is entirely possible as well.
So your analogy with somebody who's accredited to be able to talk about asbestos isn't really valid, because A, people identify asbestos or don't identify asbestos, and B, there's not going to potentially be a difference of opinion that matters as crucially as matters in the judicial system.
Yes, exactly. The three steps I talked about earlier, which are what you choose to be analysed, then you have the analysis, and then you have the interpretation. Most of our issues are not about the analysis. Usually the results are okay. Usually the issues we end up having to deal with are things like what could have been done that wasn't, and then the interpretation of that result. Once you have sight of pretty much the whole case, you try and put that into context, and that's where the opinion comes in.
So if all three of you were given a blank piece of paper and charged with putting a quality standard system around forensics, would you start from the ISOs? Or would you start somewhere completely different?
I actually think, to pick up my colleague's point, in the fact that there is value in looking at procedural and process accreditation plus individual competency and certification. And if we look at other disciplines and we look at aspects of life, that is exactly what is done. So the individual themselves must be able to demonstrate that they are competent, but they are working within frameworks that are regulated and accredited. To pick up about opinions, there is ways of essentially calibrating people's opinions by assessing the results and the opinions that they gather from simulations, for example, when we have ground truth data that we know what the answers are. Forensic science is unique in the fact that we don't necessarily know what's happened, and therefore we do only have opinions, but we can calibrate, validate and verify the methods that are used to produce results which we then use to form our opinions. And I think that is key, that we need to mitigate the risk associated with that information gathering, which we then use to form those opinions.
Lord Renfrew. Thank you. I'd like to ask you about what you feel are the gaps in research in the field of forensic science and in the understanding of forensic science. And what do you feel could be the role of UK research and innovation in advancing that?
I guess it's my turn to go first.
Sure.
I recently returned to academia after running my own company for a fairly lengthy period, and I was an academic before that. I have been conscious all through my career that in academia, forensic science is not looked on favourably by management. It does not have a unique unit of assessment for research excellence framework, although it does now get audited for it.
Management of the university.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It is not a good career move. I think what we need is an acknowledgement within all of the research councils, and hence through UKRI, that forensic science is a societal issue and that we need greater direction rather than specifically targeting forensic science for funding programs. I think the Research Council should be asking questions of people applying for funding along the lines of, does your research have potential within the criminal justice system and within forensic science?
Quite such a diverse field indeed.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to remember that DNA came about largely because a police officer happened to be at a conference at the right time and had a conversation in the bar. And things like this happen all the time. Targeting specific thematic areas leads to short-term solutions, but getting people to think about the problem and think about the potential applications of their research potentially will have a much larger, longer-term benefit.
Thank you.
You say that forensic science not recognised in the ref.
Absolutely. It doesn't have its own category, and therefore it makes it difficult to get it recognised by the research councils for funding. I think this is a core area that could massively increase the willingness within universities and the university management to accept forensic science as a
Is
research
this something that the Chartered Society could advance, this issue of gaps and recognition?
Well, certainly we have put submissions in, for example, around recognition to the research councils, and I think it's an area that we would look for government support to look at where the gaps are opening up, and actually simply by getting it recognised as a subject in its own right or as a set of disciplines, it would mean that UK universities would highly benefit from a coordinated framework.
The problem I see is it's such a diverse bundle of disciplines, really, that it's difficult to see how UKRI, for instance, would focus properly on forensic science as an entity.
That is, and it is an applied science. It's not a pure science,
right.
And the fact that it is disparate, that is its challenge, and I think its opportunity.
There are many examples.
Absolutely, medical science.
Medical, environmental science is exactly what it is.
You agree that the issue in promoting science, more research in forensic, must be the quality of the case made to support more research?
And to enable the universities to recognise that it is valuable in the ref. Otherwise, forensic science academics are on a hiding to nothing from their career development.
And actually, we do have a problem in the current ref. Although forensic science is going to be counted for the first time, a significant number of staff who are active in forensic science will not be returned because of the nature of the contracts they are on. They are excluded from being returnable for the ref. So there will be a skewed view of the activity.
Okay, so the ref system is an issue, is it?
It's at least part of the issue, and I think part of the solution.
Okay, we'll explore that with the UKRI. Lord Mayor.
We've talked a lot about digital forensics already, but Mr. Marshall, in your written evidence, you talked about there being a proliferation of different data formats, and you said it's impossible for investigators to keep pace.
Absolutely.
Can you say a bit more about that? I mean, that sounds rather alarming. Does it mean that it's proceeding at such a rapid pace that it's difficult to really do the job properly?
I don't know about making it impossible to do the job properly. What it does mean is that we are constantly having to develop new techniques, and we are up against human ingenuity rather than evolution. So all you have to do is look at something like the app stores and the number of new apps that are added every day, each one of which will have its own functionality, its own particular data formats, and there's the potential for each and every one of them to be involved in some criminal act. So that at some point we may have to devise a technique for dealing with them. If we couple that with the privacy issues and the increase in security that is being put onto devices, that also presents challenges to us. The increasing storage on devices, there is a limit to how quickly we can extract data from devices, so that adds time in every investigation. And then we have the proliferation of devices that are inherently insecure and not capturing sufficient data to allow investigation. And in that realm, I'm thinking of the Internet of Things in particular. So we are up against a problem where human beings, for convenience, are willingly disclosing more and more data, some of which has evidential value, but it is not in easily accessible formats. We struggle to assess which is going to be the most valuable at the start of any investigation, and then even if we can extract the data, we may not be able to interpret it in a reasonable amount of time.
And to what extent is this difficulty that you're describing shared amongst your colleagues outside your organisation, in the providers who are looking at this kind of problem? Is it something that's kept very secret within each organisation, or
no? Every organisation is aware of the problem. Every organisation is clamouring for extra resources to deal with it. What we lack is a coordinated effort to deal with some of these issues. A lot of the problems are pushed back to tool providers, vendors, in the hope that they can deal with it.
But at conferences, for example, are these problems you're discussing, are they openly discussed?
They are often not published, but they are openly discussed in the community and with the community's management, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Schudel, you talked about the the problem with digital forensics, particularly being the pilot hire, require a cheap approach.
Yes.
And that's leading to rather low quality work. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I think there's a certain aspect of this where what's fit for purpose, what's not. And I think in a lot of the cases that, because we're at the sharp end, if you like, of the system, where everything else has been filtered out. So we see a disproportionate number of issues, but most of the cases where digital work's done will go ahead smoothly. And the work that was done, minimal work that was done just to capture some information, was suitable for that case. It's just when it comes down to trial, and then we start seeing issues where there's actually a lot more going on than we thought. And then it takes time to unravel that. And time is probably time and the funding are the two issues that the main barriers in getting the work done. Too late in the day, there's a lot of work that comes sometimes at the start of a trial, for example, and they want something reviewed because it's just been served. There's not enough time capacity to deal with it. And then, of course, the funding side of it, where we struggle to employ more people, well, we may have some more capacity to deal with these last-minute issues that come in.
So can I ask, Joan, if I may, can I ask all three of you, what should the criminal justice system do to try to meet these difficulties, these challenges, specifically around digital forensics?
I think just a reasonable understanding of the time it takes when there's a late serving of evidence, and it does need to be reviewed. I think the defence are very likely just to accept it and go, that's fine. And then having said that, to be able to have a mechanism to say, right, well, it's going to take a reasonable time, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. The problem is, it's not as if people are sitting around waiting for a case to come through the door. Whatever comes in has to be somehow juggled into all the other cases that have very short deadlines that we're trying to do at the same time. And I think most of the providers are in the same situation at the moment.
So you're overstretched in that sense?
Yes, exactly.
I think the other thing that would help would be, as I said, some sort of coordination and horizon scanning exercise that fed into proper research and development activity. Again, that is something of a luxury that not many agencies have access to.
Who would do that?
That's an excellent question. I look forward to seeing an answer in your report.
What do you think should do?
My view is that it needs to be a community effort. We need to have some sort of coordinating body in the community as a whole and get them to take a lead on it. This is something we are not good at.
Bearing in mind you described the community under stress, and this would be a voluntary addition to the level of activity, is that a likely solution? I mean, it might be desirable, but is it feasible under the current circumstances?
Without additional resources, I think the answer to that has been clear from the rest of the work we've talked about. I think if I can just raise one other point with digital provision as well.
I need to conclude, so we need to be quite quick.
So I think that a lot of the smaller organisations that are undertaking digital work also have issues with being able to know exactly how much work they're likely to get, and therefore there's a huge amount of cost in training and maintaining the right level of staff for the workflow, which is highly fluctuating.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that it's taken us longer than usual because of the interruption with the votes, but I'd like to thank you on behalf of the committee, all three of you, for coming this afternoon and helping.
Very well.
We're very grateful to you. We'll stop.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
I'm going to make a start, but before we make a start, two things. One, from my left, would you mind introducing yourself so we get you on the record? And secondly, it is possible that any minute now we might get an interruption for a vote. If that happens, I'm afraid we'll have to call a halt for a few minutes. But we make a start. Please, can you introduce yourself from my left?
Mark Stokes, Head of Digital Forensics in the Metropolitan Police Service, part of Forensic Services.
Thank you.
I'm Jam Colley, Discovery Forensics Limited. We offer digital forensic and cybersecurity services to corporate and legal clients.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Sommer. I'm Professor of Digital Forensics at Birmingham City University. I have a visiting professorship at another university. I work for both the prosecution and the defence because my professorships are only 10% of my time, given that I'm semi-retired from academic life. In the past, I have been the joint lead assessor for the old system run by the Council for the Registration of Forensic Practitioners. And I've also sat for a while on the advisory panel used by the Forensic Science Regulator to look at digital forensics.
Oh, thank you very much. Now, my question might seem too simple for you, but it's very important for us. And if you can just very clearly crystallize for us, what is digital forensic? How does it differ from cyber forensic? And what is cybercrime?
There's no clear definition. Digital forensics
that helps us a lot. Yes.
Sorry? Well, if you let me finish the sentence, perhaps I can help you. Digital forensics basically is anything that involves looking at a digital device or a digital transmission. You can have arguments on the fringes of forensics. Obviously, it includes looking at computers, smartphones, looking at data in transmission, looking at large computers. But it can also look at more conventional forms of forensic or older types of forensics because those go digital as well. So CCTV used to be purely analog. There's now a digital element. So some work that you might do in terms of CCTV would involve digital forensics, but others in terms of recognizing a particular face would be old-fashioned forensics. So you can have quite a lot of my short answer, which you said didn't help you very much, but there are no clear definitions, and it is much more a question of what practitioners can deliver in particular circumstances.
Okay. Do any other?
Actually, some Home Office definitions, if I may, just to add some clarity. So, if we talk about pure cybercrime, these are the crimes where a digital system is targeted by means of a criminal attack. These attacks are designed to disrupt our infrastructures, like DDoS attacks and those types of things. Cyber-enabled crimes are really those crimes that are using current internet and infrastructures to commit frauds and crimes that would have been committed in another way, card frauds and those sorts of things, using mobile telephones to phone up people and ask for card numbers, or using digital systems to do that. It's not a cyber crime per se. And then digital forensics, just to add what Peter was saying, is really about the processing of that data, that digital data, ensuring its integrity throughout the process, and then the interpretation of that data to the criminal justice system.
It's got very little to do with cybercrime. I mean, for historic reasons, I get quite a lot of the big hacker cases, which people would traditionally think of as cybercrime. But my instructions have included terrorism, several really rather gruesome murders, trading in firearms, trading in narcotics, can be practically anything. These days will even include basic street crime because there will probably be some CCTV involved and some mobile phone geolocation data. So there's very little connection between digital forensics and definitions of cybercrime.
Thank you very much. That helps. Baroness Bellingham-Buller.
We've heard in this inquiry so far differing views on the balance between private provision of these services, in particular digital, but also police provision, in-house provision. I'd welcome any of your views on whether that balance is right today and whether, if you could, and if funds were available, you'd change it in any way.
In terms of digital forensics, my personal view is that it's a mistake to outsource other than in very exceptional circumstances. And the reason for that is that if you have an inquiry, it is unlikely that the immediate OIC, the officer in charge, is going to have an idea of the range of possibilities that exist inside a computer. If the thing is outsourced, the OIC will try his best to say what he wants. If he sends it to an outsourcer who has been squeezed on price, the outsourcer will then do exactly what was asked, but no more. Where the thing is at its most productive is if the technical investigator and the regular investigator sit down together, try and work out what the issues are, and then they can then stimulate each other to get a better result. There is scope for outsourcing on the very simple side, and there is scope on the expert side, particularly when you want expert evidence as opposed to technical evidence.
But within the police budgets, there's also constraints. It's not just the market restraints of the private provision.
Well, yes, if fundamentally, if there's only so much money in the public sector system, whether you insource it or outsource it really isn't the question. It's how, as Peter is inferring, that you manage that ecosystem in trying to get that work done within that limited budget and the constraints you have within that. I would agree with Peter, but then you would say I would say that. So
I wouldn't possibly.
I let have others to talk, but there certainly is benefits with insourcing, but it's the same envelope of money. That's the point.
What's been the benefits, if you see them, from the market?
So what? Just speaking from personal experience, what we've done in the Metropolitan Police Service is we've used the private sector to do some of the more complex stuff. We still struggle with finance, but we're using a managed service provision to help us to work. Instead of the market just throwing technologies at us and software, we're working with a private sector company to leverage those technologies and develop those technologies for digital forensics.
Sorry, I'll come to you in a minute, Dr. Colley. I think you were saying that the more complex things you give to the private sector, whereas Professor Sumner was saying that the thing was to give the easier things to the private sector.
No, I was saying...
have I oversimplified that?
Sorry, just to clarify, what we're saying is the development of the software, some of the research and development can be done with the private sector. The actual evidential work needs to be done in unison, whether that's the private sector or the public sector, with the investigative process. But bearing in mind, you've got to avoid cognitive bias. So where forensic science sits in that process is also very important.
What I was saying is you've got two...
Dr. Colley, I really will come to you in a minute.
She'll speak. We've done this sort of show before, so she'll speak up in time, sure. Just to clarify what I was saying, I think there is scope at the very, very simple level, but otherwise, as Mark is saying, it's a complex level. But the vast majority benefits considerably from insourcing, simply because it is important that investigators work together. And if you're calling in an outside expert, then my strong preference is that I actually go and work with the investigator. I don't want work doled out to me without having a context.
Thank you. Dr. Colley, please add to this.
It's not what I'm seeing out in the field, and it's not what police officers are telling me, actually. I was only speaking to some last Wednesday. What I'm seeing in the field is that regular police officers are trying to be digital forensic analysts because they're being given these rather whizzy tools, these magic tools that do everything, that turn a police officer, a regular police officer, who, you know, good as he may be, is not a digital forensic analyst, and they're just pushing some buttons, getting some output, and then quite frequently it's being looked over by the officer in charge of the case who's got no more training, in fact even less training probably than him, in exactly this, and they will make jump to conclusions about what that means because they simply are being pressured to do so, and they haven't got the resources, they haven't got the training to be able to make the right inferences from those results, and that's going smack in front of the court, and it's now, I mean, the courts, in my view, and I do an awful lot of this, day in, day out in the criminal justice system, and it's like some evil sausage machine that's just trying to criminalise people. Once you get into the maws of the criminal justice system, it's jolly difficult to get out. And if I may quote a solicitor I was working with a year ago on a rather large worldwide case, in actual fact, and this is important for access to justice. He said, people come through my door certain that the legal system is scrupulously fair, and I have to watch as they gradually find out that it isn't. Without exception, by the end of the trial, they end up thinking that the prosecutor is a corrupt bully and that the judge is biased against them. Is that what we want?
Can we focus it rather than attacking the whole criminal justice system?
Well, sorry,
can we focus it on what would you do if that's your view? What would you do with forensic science to improve that opinion of yours, rather than the whole system?
Well, the whole system obviously is massive, so you can't improve the whole thing in one fell swoop. I think money needs to be invested in training officers that are actually in the front line. All they're getting at the minute is about a day's worth, if they're lucky, of training, how to push buttons and get some answers. They need more than that. For instance, I was talking to a police officer on an indecent images case only the other day, and I said, first of all, we need to get MOU signed, because obviously you have to have that signed so that I can take away those images which are illegal, work on them, so that I don't get criminalised because I'm working on them. He didn't even know what an MOU was. Now, I use the word images, he thinks I'm talking about the nasty pictures, not a digital forensic image. So they don't even have the basics. So the people in the front line, they're being asked to run these tools over hard disks and over people's mobile phones.
So your solution to that is training the police officers or outsourcing?
I think if you're going to use police officers like that, you've got to give them better training. It's very unfair to ask a regular police officer to stick his neck on the line like that.
Thank you.
Okay. That is Neville Jones. Quick. No, it's fine. Lord Hunt.
Can I just come back on some of that? I think if we ensure that it all works within a quality management system, that's part of it, and 17020 and 17025 have a real place, and statutory powers, in my humble opinion, have a place to play in all of that. Absolutely, the police officer today is what I would term a digital native. When they come in, they use social media, they do all these things, they're used to all this technology, they don't know the constraints and limitations, so training of what should be seized, how it should be handled is absolutely critical, and there is a lack of that. They get taught how to write out tickets and do traffic and all of those things. A core part of their police training really should be around the digital world. A lot of work is going on around that within DI, DMIs and digital media investigators and digital intelligence and investigation. However, more needs to be done in that basic education.
We're coming to some more of that in a subsequent question.
Yes.
Lord Hunt, can I move on to yours?
So you're partly answering this question. What is the level of understanding of digital forensic science within the criminal justice system amongst lawyers, judges and juries? And
you've covered some of it.
We covered this. And how can it be improved? Particularly, it sounds as if you're saying some of the frontline people have very little training. Presumably then they're talking to some lawyers that have a slightly higher level of training.
Well,
and the juries need to understand it. And
that's
and
absolutely
so
right.
And how are all these different levels and competences fit together?
It's like a completely different. It's like it's like talking about a world over here and a world over there, really, because the court system is obviously very, very different. The judges usually have a pretty good idea because they've usually sat on quite a lot of cases and they pay attention. And if they're not sure, they will ask the expert when you're in the box. Barristers likewise tend to learn quite a lot whilst they're on the feet, whilst they're doing a lot of these cases. Sometimes they go a bit too quick to thinking they understand it to the core. Occasionally that happens. Juries, it depends who you've got on the jury. You can't expect all jury members to have much idea about computers and mobile phones and how they work and that sort of thing. And that's where the role of the expert, I think, is key, because without that help, and we're there to assist the court, without that help, they can't ask those more fine-grained questions that they really need to drive to come to the right answers in their deliberations.
Yes, there is a lack of consultation within the criminal justice system with the experts, and that conversation going on around what does the evidence mean, and sometimes assumptions are made around what.
But do you think sometimes the kind of emphasis is on this digital side, whereas actually there's some basic businesses of
it's very patchy. I mean, you can get judges who are extremely alert. I've seen judges do sort of an effective cross-examination of an expert, and they knew exactly what they were doing. You get other judges who basically busk their way through, get sort of angry and annoyed because they think what is being said is irrelevant, usually because they haven't understood what is going on. And one of the other problems with judges at the moment is that they don't understand how to manage cases where there is digital evidence. You have to realise that quantities are huge. It's important that at the case management stage, a judge asks everybody who's supposed to produce digital evidence or produce report to state what sort of timetable they're prepared to work to, and then make them stick to it. The bane of everyone's life, if you're in this particular game, is that the day before a trial, or even during a trial, somebody comes along and says, oh, there's this great new bit of evidence, it's really important, and you then say, I haven't got time to do it at the sort of level of quality you are expecting, and then everyone sort of looks down at you. Don't you realise the expense of a crack trial? You've got all these judges, you've got all these witnesses, you've got all these jury members. Please do your best. Your best may not be good enough, really. So one of the things that we really need to look at, and I hope is reflected in your report, because I know you'll look for recommendations, is judges must have much better case management where there is digital evidence.
And this part of, and presumably the judge's role is also to, as we've discussed before, looking at the evidence and the technology of the defence and the prosecution.
Well, one of the things that's open to a judge is to order or arrange for a meeting between experts before a trial. It's Criminal Procedure Rule 19.6. I've done a lot of that sort of work. I've written about it in academic journals, and I think it's enormously beneficial because very often there'll be a lot of agreement between experts, and you can then shorten the length of a trial, not sort of bore the pants off everybody with stuff about which there is no dispute. And you then get the experts to say succinctly, if they disagree, what the points of disagreement are. And that all comes down again to good trial management. But it's in the, it's in the criminal procedure rules. You don't have to invent anything. Okay, but they've got to make a decision at the right time, the pre-trial review, to actually use the method.
Lord Griffiths. On that point, sorry, just on that point, I think there's a fundamental
challenge here that the judiciary we have to try and address throughout the criminal justice system. The technology moves very quickly. What can be done one day changes to the next day. So you need open access to that information and knowledge online somehow, so the judiciary, CPS and others are informed of what the latest technologies can do.
So communication side.
Yeah, and that can change daily, literally.
Lord Griffiths.
Can I just ask, from your experience of being involved in trials and so on, to what extent have judges, in their summing up, made or have had to make a judgment regarding the evidence of forensic science?
It's not their job to do that.
It may not be their job to do it. That's not the question I asked. The question I asked was, do they actually do it?
It's hard to answer that question because usually you've gone before the end of the trial. You don't see it. You don't hear it. I'm sorry to say.
Unless you sometimes get
if you get transcripts.
Transcripts, but that's very rare indeed, and that's only normally where something's gone wrong, and then you're going back through it all.
Okay, quick one from Baroness Young and then Lord Renfrew.
It was really about these pre-trial meetings. Shouldn't they be obligatory? That there should be an agreement between the experts. Shouldn't pre-trial meetings between the experts be obligatory? That they should reach a view before the trial?
Obligatory. It's often very sensible. It can happen in two circumstances. Very often, in a complex case, the experts will suggest, why don't we have a meeting, and then there are particular rules about how that meeting is conducted. Basic rule being it's collegiate, the contents, the actual discussions are not disclosable. The only thing that is disclosable is the thing that happens at the end. There is also an option for the judge to order it, but my personal experience is counsel tend to recognise the value of having those meetings because a lot of the technical detail, as I said, is agreed and is pretty tedious for people to listen to.
What I'm finding is that we're getting more and more directions for experts to agree what they're going to agree and disagree about what they're going to disagree before we ever get to trial, which of course is very sensible if that can happen. Sometimes it can't happen. Sometimes you just can't agree with each other, so you both have to go in. Sometimes it all happens so quickly that the two reports go in and there isn't even time for that, and the judge will quite often send you out into a room together, basically knock your heads together and come out when you've agreed something, and let us know the answer. And that's very, very sensible. But it doesn't happen all the time. And especially where things happen very quickly, as Peter was saying, sometimes they'll phone you up mid-trial and say, quick, can you look at this? Quick, can you give me an opinion on that? By the way, the judge wants it by Thursday. This is Monday. And you kind of throw your hands up in despair, really, because it can't be done that fast. And it's not like we don't have anything else.
One of the areas where it's useful is also when you just need to explain a bit of technology, how something works. And every so often, a prosecutor will come up with a diagram or even some moving video to try and make a point. And obviously it is then important that the defence gets to see that and say, yes, we agree. And so when the evidence is presented to the jury, they say, yes, this particular bit of explanation has been done. I mean, I'm being asked to do something like that right now.
Lord Renfrew.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm rather disquieted. I'm getting the impression from what the three of you are telling us that we have here rather a chaotic field. I was particularly surprised to learn that you would not be aware, usually, of what the judge had said in his summing up. And I'm therefore rather uncertain how you get an overview. I suppose as an expert witness, it's not your job to give an overview, but how you get an overview of what's happened in the trial and its result. I have a prepared question here. Is enough being done to prepare for the increasing role that digital forensics will have in the future? And I think what you've said already gives a negative answer to that, but what should be done then in the system that digital forensics, the role of digital forensics is properly understood in the criminal justice system?
Well, there's many factors to answer that question, but certainly knowledge and information and presenting that knowledge and information in a dynamic manner so it can be accessed by the whole of judiciary, CPS, jurors even, but it has to be validated and put there and managed in the right way, so it's correct, it's not Googling it, that won't work at all. There needs to be more investment and more coordination in research and development. A lot of things that we do are last minute. Some of them are impossible to do, some of them may be possible to do. There isn't enough knowledge and understanding of where those limitations sit. And the timescales for the complexity of what you may be asked to do, an application or something that you've never seen before that needs to be reverse engineered. It may be possible to reverse engineer it, it may take you a long time to reverse engineer it. That has to be a complex conversation that goes on. And again, going full circle back within the criminal justice system, those conversations really should be happening on what are the points to prove within the investigation and what is the defence case, clearly stating what the defence is early on in the trial. And that doesn't always happen. In fact, that's the least, it's quite unfrequent for that.
So
I
at what
actually
point
have
does
to
it not
agree with
happen
that.
in the trial what the defence case is? Could you just clarify what you just said a little?
Well, it should be a clear defence statement in that trial. It's very rare that we get a defence statement even fed down to us within digital forensics, within policing, let alone if we do get one, the clarity of that defence statement may be.
The defence statement would be in advance of the trial, I'm saying.
Yes, it's part of the criminal procedure
It's
investigation
part of
that
the
you have to
procedure.
produce a defence case statement.
What is the defence? What is it that the defence are saying against the prosecution's case and evidence within a digital context I'm talking about?
To be fair, I'm probably going to lose some friends by saying this, I'm finding that quite a lot of defence lawyers just aren't that organised when it comes down to it, and they frequently don't think about the value, the potential value that the digital evidence might have in a particular case. And therefore they're racing to the finish. They think about it a couple of weeks before. It's too late because you can't get access to it that quick. Even if the officer in charge of the case knows where it is, it's highly unlikely to get a hold of it in a couple of weeks' time. So there's quite a lot of disorganisation going on there.
And as forensic practitioners working within the prosecution context, we're still independent professional practitioners, and we are there to help both sides. If we know both sides of the story, then we can assist to help unravel what it might be with all that complex data, messaging. In complex rape cases, a lot of this is, we've had cases with 44,000 social media messages on one device. And if you're then having the defence saying one thing or not saying anything, and then the prosecution saying something else, then you need a clear guidance on what that defence is going to be and what to help.
We do also need to work together more effectively,
Yes.
because it's not always the case that the prosecution is just sitting there waiting to be my friend.
No.
Frequently that's not the case.
I just to add one thing, Lord Chairman. In an earlier session, witnesses drew a distinction between what they called the luxury end and the routine end. Certainly my experience, and I've been around rather a long time, I tend to get the luxury cases. The luxury cases tend to be done rather well. The concern that you hear, particularly at an anecdotal level, and you're hearing it from Jan now, is that at the below the luxury level, where people are determined to do things properly, and you get the very best people, then that's where the problem lies.
Okay, Lord Warwick and then Lord Mayor.
To follow up on Lord Renfrew's, I think we received evidence that about 70% of crimes have a digital element that is possible, if that's right. But how many trials have a digital aspect in the evidence? That is, how often is the digital evidence brought out in the trial? And does that imply, that difference between the two percentages, does that imply the amount of growth that should occur?
I don't think the statistics, I don't know, unless Mark knows different, I don't know the statistics are being collected. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was instructed in a particularly gruesome murder case. What was the digital evidence? The digital evidence was that the accused said he wasn't there at the place of the murder, and he could prove it because there were computer logs on another computer in another location. It was a tiny part of the overall case. And I don't think anybody would be collecting those statistics, but it's just to illustrate that it is all pervasive. So I don't know where the 70% figure comes from. It might be 90%.
I think it's, in terms of investigations across all types of crime, we believe, it's anecdotal I'm afraid, we don't have clear statistics, but it's probably nearer to 90% of crime has a digital element, in the broadest sense of that. CCTV, communications data, social media data,
and
cyber
what
attacks.
percentage of trials bring out that evidence?
We don't know.
Evidence?
I don't know.
Is it your experience that most trials have digital, or of the small minority of trials?
Well, the only trials I know is where there is digital
Where
evidence.
there
And
is
people aren't going to ring me up if there isn't any.
We're only involved in the ones that have digital evidence, but I would conclude, even if there's a bit of attrition in there, you're probably talking a large number of criminal trials, which is all I can talk about. Obviously, fraud cases, most of those will be digital these days, but murders, complex rape cases, and those, you're probably talking about 90% of those cases will have a digital element in them as well.
Okay. Lord Mayor.
In the context of digital forensics, I mean, it's clear that the data that you're dealing with is increasing all the time. Can you say something about the role of machine learning? Machine learning.
Right. I don't know whether you've had it yet, because I was a bit sort of disturbed by some of the things that were being said in earlier sessions, and I have sent in a briefing note. I don't know. Have you had that
yet?
Yes,
we've seen that. Thank you. Yes.
Well, it depends what you mean by. The first thing I have to say is people use this phrase artificial intelligence much too loosely. The definition keeps on changing. That's why one prefers to talk about machine learning, because it's rather more specific.
Indeed.
We use a lot of computer searching techniques and computer analysis techniques. But in terms of machine learning in the criminal system, I'm not sure that it is actually particularly beneficial. It works very well in civil e-disclosure, where you can get agreements, and there is a need to use a technology-aided review to plough through lots and lots of documents to see whether they are relevant. And you do that by giving the machine learning program a sample to work with, to devise some rules, and then to follow them.
Training.
Doesn't work in criminal system. And in terms of the various techniques, technology techniques that are available, I think Mark has already hinted at it. The real difficulty is looking through chat logs, social media messages, because the language is highly informal, may use a lot of slang, and the only way to do it is to go through it with an interpretation, which you then show to the other side and see if they will accept it. Sorry, I need some water.
So I understand exactly your point about machine learning, but are there any advanced technological methods that you're using to be able to deal with all this data?
I'd slightly disagree. I'd like to turn this round the other way, if I may. If you imagine the modern mobile phone today, which potentially can have 1 terabyte of data on it, which is 78 million documents on one mobile device, or pages of information, it is becoming impossible for an investigator to review, disclose, analyse, view, read all of that information. Therefore, artificial intelligence and machine learning both have a place to play in this, but we have to be very careful in the application of those technologies. We need academia and science to work with us to do the testing and validation, and how we teach. These systems learn, there's a clue in the name obviously, they learn from how they are taught, and if the wrong people teach them, they will learn the wrong things, so they could bias themselves in one direction or another. So we have to be extremely careful. They absolutely have a place to play. Large-scale compute, storage of this data all have a place to play. But again, I come back to one fundamental challenge. It requires investment and money, because it's huge amounts of data that needs processing.
They have a place to play, as
yes.
you say, but the real question is, how much are they playing a role now, or are you talking about the potential?
Yeah, we're on the infancy. Some of that is being applied, and we still need to do a lot more work to understand how those systems are working. Are they missing data? Do they produce false negatives? There's a whole lot of science needs to go behind that. And again, it's a problem within digital forensics and forensic science. We don't have that coordinated research and development. So you could have one force applying something, one force saying, I'm not going to do it, a private company applying something, another one not. And it's very disorganised and not done together in terms of that validation and testing and ensuring that that software is giving us the right answers.
So does that mean that at present it is still people having to plough through all this data?
Yes, to the majority. We're just about in the Metropolitan Police Service over the next 12, 18 months to implement some very basic search and review tools for officers. But again, it's the investment in the storage the compute power, and just processing all of that data, which takes a long time.
And Dr. Colleague, what's your view?
Well, I'd really only echo what Mark was saying, really. I know it doesn't come into private practice a great deal because obviously the volumes of data aren't as large as something like Metropolitan Police have to deal with. And I think the main controversy is that human biases might be replicated by some of these machine learning systems, and that's got to be watched very closely, particularly in those systems like face recognition where race might be a variable. So I think it's got to be watched, and I'm sure you're completely aware of that. It's got to be watched, used with caution. The thing about artificial intelligence is also very hard to explain what happened there. It's very hard to put your finger on how the machine came up with that answer. So as a science, it's a difficult one to pinpoint. Say, how did the machine come up with that answer? And quite frequently, I did some AI programming, and I know that sometimes you go, don't know, put in that, and it came out with that.
You have to do the ground truth data experiments. You have to produce the ground truth data. Again, we don't have a coordinated approach in UK or England and Wales to do that. We don't have, in the States, we have NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, that would produce data sets and assist. Again, different forces are producing different data sets, different organisations are producing data sets to test these systems. There is not a coherent, coordinated approach to that.
Lord Thomas and then Barry.
Short question, you won't be able to answer it now, but could you let us have some figures as to the amount of time the police spend in the Metropolitan Police going through these documents, and two, your investment programme, so one can analyse whether the investment is right?
The investment is not right, I can tell you that.
Yeah, but we'd like to see the figures to look at it.
Well,
I said you couldn't answer it now, but if you can.
I sort of can. So I can give you a ratio example. So in traditional forensic science in the Metropolitan Police, we send circa £60 million on traditional forensic science. On digital forensic science, we spend 11.2 million. And in terms of time of police officers, I have one example, because I was at the thick end of it till midnight one night trying to assist in trying to get some rationale with the judge. The judge insisted that an iPad was downloaded over Friday night, close of play, weekend's work. We eventually managed to get into the iPad. It was password protected. We recovered the data. It took 20 police officers all weekend to go through the data on that device.
But it would have been useful to have the comprehensive
I'm
figures.
I'm not sure the Met Police can come up with the figures of how long officers are using
as best
training.
you can,
we
because
can,
the
we can
investment
try
is
to do
obviously
something.
very
Definitely.
Or to ask the National Crime Agency, who, when they examine these, will have even more complex cases than the Met routinely have.
We'll do that.
That's all.
Okay, but if you have information, real information, then please send it. But can I now move on to Baroness Young, please?
We've talked. You've mentioned the whole question of accreditation and the two ISOs. I mean, is that the right system for maintaining quality in the system?
In my personal opinion, yes. I have to declare that I'm also the chair of the Regulator Specialist Group, and I've listened to a number of people over the years talk about different standards that you can apply, 27. There's all sorts of standards out there for security and others. The basic principles of 17025 and 17020 are good and firm principles. They're about validating and testing software and systems and processes, understanding your methods, having an overall quality management system in place for your organisation, understanding error. When errors occur, but then you are reporting those errors and you are fixing those errors. Your staff are competent to undertake the tasks that they're doing. They understand the complexities of that data that they are processing or interpreting. Auditing, what we call proficiency tests, where tests, blind tests, are sent to laboratories. An expert will then go through that test where someone else independently knows what the results of that test will be, and they go through it and they will check whether you have performed within that proficiency test. So my personal opinion is it's as good a standard as anything else that's out there.
The limitation is this, that ISO 17025 started out as a laboratory calibration standard. It has been adapted and extended. It works pretty well for a lot of traditional trace forensics, when you're simply saying run one particular test. We need the test to be properly designed, properly executed, and so on. And that was very much the view that you were getting from the Forensic Science Society witness earlier on this afternoon. The problem is that the tools we of necessity use contain lots and lots of bits of different knowledge. We have, I don't know whether you've had it demonstrated to you, but the way most of these tools work is you are presented with the total view of all the contents of a computer or a smartphone, and within that the result of lots and lots of reverse engineering individual tests which have never by themselves actually been tested out, are displayed, and you have to make a guess as to whether you're going to accept it. So you can never have a proper accreditation of the sort of tools the vast majority of people use. And that was the point I think Angus Marshall was trying to make in the previous session as well. Now, Mark, I know, disagrees with me.
Fundamentally disagree.
But which will make it interesting for you.
Well, I happen to agree with Professor Sommer on this.
Okay, but all systems will have errors in them. We will never understand everything that's going on within complex systems. It's programming, it's very complex. But if we know nothing about those systems, that's even worse.
Well, it's not knowing nothing about systems. Is that test appropriate? Most of the forensic tools that we use are actually tested to within an inch of their lives by the companies who produce those tools. We're not allowed to reverse engineer them, because that would be legal anyway. And
that's
also,
not
it's
strictly true.
Okay. So let me just try and unravel this for the benefit of lay readers. Let's
yes,
put it like
apologies.
Mr. Stokes, you finish first. What do you say?
At the end of the day, it comes back to what I was talking about earlier. It's ground truth data. It is very difficult. It is not like traditional forensic science. It is complicated. That's why some of the regulators' timescales are challenging, because to make up those data sets, make up's not the right word, develop those data sets that represent what someone would do on their device. So you know what data you're putting into the system, and then working through as an expert what comes out the other end, what you expect to come out the end, the errors that might be within that system. Take, for example, times and dates. They're a classical thing within digital forensics that can get misrepresented. So you would make sure you put in representative data that has times and dates that you know, and you will see what the system does and whether it reports those times and dates correctly. That's just one example.
So every update of Windows 10.
No, one at a time, please.
Sorry,
it's not Windows 10, it's the tool. It's the testing and validation and method you don't do for every variable. Within a tool, academics talking now, we'll have an argument amongst ourselves if we're not careful.
I'm not an academic, I'm a
practitioner. But within a method, the validation is of the method. You don't use every aspect of a tool. So you can focus down on what the process and method is that you're testing and validating, and the person acting upon and using those tools and undertaking that method is competent to do. And that's the scope of the validation.
Dr. Colley, from this is the other mechanism that is available in the courts. You go back to the criminal procedure rules and how it covers expert evidence, and forensic science is a subset of it. The opportunity is for somebody to check something, and that's where the role of the defence expert is so key. The products that are used to perform the original analysis on the prosecution side are always going to be defective. If a defendant raises with his solicitor or her solicitor that they are dissatisfied with the results, the solicitor will then call in an expert who will track through all the work. And if the work has been properly documented according to the requirements of the criminal procedure rules, and they lay down extensive list of requirements of what ought to go in, then the defence expert provides that sort of backstop and reassurance that something is worthwhile. But the idea that you can accredit any of these tools that we use, I'm afraid, is, sorry, Mark, delusional.
You're not accrediting the tool, you're accrediting the methodology and the process. It's very different.
Yeah. Dr. Colley.
I actually want to throw the cat amongst the pigeons here slightly, because I don't think that the same tests and things that apply to DNA forensics apply to digital forensics. It's a different thing altogether. It's a different kettle of fish. Things like stuff that's out on the cloud, how can you recover that in a forensically sound way? How can you prove you've done it in a forensically sound way? The other thing is cost, and I heard some other witnesses speaking earlier. The cost of doing some of these standards is going to be absolutely phenomenal. And not only is it going to put some people out of business, a lot of police forces can't afford it. So what's going to happen is that police evidence could be rendered inadmissible if certain forces haven't managed to achieve the standard in time. And that's going to be quite a big one.
I don't think it'll ever be admissible. I think there's several things in there. That one, if clearly something is produced in error or by mistake, then the criminal justice system, along with the practitioners, both for the prosecution and defence, have a role in there to identify that. That's everyone in that system has a role to identify that. I do disagree that at the moment we do very little testing and validation in the past, and people are using these tools, so anything is better than what's happened before.
We got the message. The message is that in our report is that you guys need to get to a position where you can all agree.
I think that's going to be a very long time before we all agree on that, because
that isn't going to help the criminal justice system.
I'm afraid it isn't, and I'm sorry it's bad news. But there haven't been really good anonymous polls of everybody in the industry. I, for instance, own my own company, so I can say what I like. A lot of people think very similar things to that which I think about the criminal justice system and things such as these ISO standards, and they daren't say anything because it's their boss's company, and they just don't say anything.
I agree with a point you've made. It is complicated. There isn't enough funding within the system.
One of the things that is happening.
So, can I stop you, please, Lord Griffiths?
What statutory powers do you think the regulator should have? And if the regulator is given them, what different outcomes should we expect?
It depends entirely on the remit. If she sticks with her current remit and wants to force ISO 17025 into situations where they don't work, it is a disaster. It's expensive for the police, as you've heard Jan saying, and in effect what external experts do, they kick up a fuss, but they then said, oh, if I can do digital forensics, there are 50,000 fewer cyber security experts that we want. I'll go off and do that and earn 3 or 4 times as much, and that's what's happening.
Can I just ask you, do you think that the regulator should be given statutory powers?
Yes.
Not at the moment.
You don't. You think not. You think yes. What about?
I'd approach that with great caution. I'd want to have some idea of what that might mean. To be absolutely honest.
So can I therefore just ask
you, like the medical profession or anything else where experts and people are doing things that are really important? What those exact statutory powers should be, I think, is up for some real discussion.
But is there nothing which
there comes
you
a point
say
when
you can all agree and say
an expert
yes,
could
there
be
should be some power that statutorily that should be given them?
An expert could be suspended if they're not acting appropriately. I think that is a power that should be there.
Now, I think there is an inquiry role which I would certainly endorse, but at the moment the forensic science regulator thinks that one model, the model that works for trace forensics, can be forced onto situations where it doesn't work, and it is important to go back and have a look at what expert testimony is in addition to forensic science. It has to fit into that framework. I don't think she's ever understood it because she comes from a DNA background, and nearly all the advisors tend to come from a trace forensics background as well. And as you have heard, digital forensics is very different. It can still be scientific and carefully explained.
Can I just ask a question from an area I know a little about, which is the financial regulator? I would say that the financial regulator, when it comes to how much capital banks should have, there's no question. It's their judgment. They have a reason for doing it. It's accepted by the industry. When it comes to them saying what should the culture of an institution be, they may say some elements of what it should include, but they wouldn't determine it in the way they would determine, for example, capital. Are there not some things in your business which are the equivalent of capital requirements on banks, where you can all agree and say whoever is in this whole business of forensic science, there should be certain standards which have to be met?
I'm not sure that
Competence
parallel
practice.
works. But the other area you can look at is certifying individuals.
Qualifications are not per se on their own competence.
Well, I was about to say we have not just qualifications, but things like the British Computer Society and the Institute of Electrical
IET, PCS, members of both.
Yes, and to gain competency in those, you have to go through you have to jump through quite a lot of hoops. So these things actually do exist.
But can I just ask Mr. Stokes?
This is different.
Mr. Stokes, can I just ask you for a minute? I mean, you think there are statutory powers which might be given and might improve this
Just
field.
because someone has a degree in electronics engineering or computer software program does not make them competent per se to be a digital forensic practitioner or a forensic scientist. Training and competence for those and interpretation are entirely different. The qualifications are a foundation stone, they're a basis. They are not the competence to carry out the activity.
How about the officer on the street? Where's he?
I couldn't comment. I'm not
Okay.
a police officer. I'm not here to talk about police.
Okay, Barrister Jones.
On this question of whether the regulator should have statutory powers, I'm not at all clear whether you are saying no, there are no circumstances in which actually that's going to be appropriate.
Yes or no?
Or are you saying the way the role is being conducted at the moment is not one I would like to endorse, and therefore I have real reservations about...
Answer number two.
Answer number two. Is that answer number two?
Yes.
I've made my point very clear, I think.
Answer number one.
Statutory powers are required, and what those statutory include, I think, needs some discussion and thought.
Okay, that's good. Lord Caker.
Thank you, Lord Chairman. I sent a question of the research base that supports the practice of digital forensic science. Is there a strong and robust research base? How is it conducted? Is there the opportunity for collaboration for those who have an academic interest in this area to further inform the development of this field?
No, and not a lot in that
Okay.
order. So, really, there is no coordination within digital forensics research and development. There's little input to what projects or research should be undertaken. Again, I think its previous witnesses have talked about, fundamental science has a place to play in here as well, and how you adopt that into forensic science disciplines. So no coordination. There's a lack of funding. We've certainly struggled with getting funding from EU and other places. We try to work closely with academia, but again, when your day job is just trying to process 50,000 exhibits a year, there isn't the bandwidth to undertake that as individual forces. That needs to be coordinated through something like transforming forensics, but be very focused on outcomes and developing that research and development.
I think that sharing research findings is often held back because people smell a saleable product. And they don't want to share that information. And I often see that, to be honest.
That is a point. But fundamental research should be peer-reviewed and published within digital
It doesn't
forensics.
happen
What
in
we
digital
also
forensics.
need is what I call what we also need is artifact research. Earlier on I was saying that the tools that people use contain hundreds, maybe even thousands of different bits of knowledge, because people have had to reverse engineer new products or new versions of products as they come up to see how they work. A lot of this is never written up. Now then, what I try to do is encourage undergraduate and master's students to try and do this sort of work, because it actually makes rather a good way of measuring whether someone should be getting a particular sort of degree. I agree with Mark. There's no central resource where one can go along and say, where do you carry out, which are the bits that need to be looking at? So at the moment you're getting lots of people looking at IoT devices because they're a new thing. You get quite a lot of people looking at cryptocurrencies, probably duplicating themselves with other stuff which is not being looked at at all.
So if people are not looking at the broad base of the science that underpins digital forensics, how confident can we be that the methodologies that are being used and the tools that are being used are reliable?
There's no the underlying methodology is perfectly straightforward. You carry out an observation, you form a hypothesis of what might be happening, you devise a way of testing it, you actually carry out tests. Having carried out the tests, you look at the results. If you need to modify your original hypothesis, then you do so. You then publish it and put it up for peer review. It's exactly the same.
But does that happen for the broad base of digital forensics?
I think it happens more in America than it does here.
Outside of the UK, in Europe and in America, absolutely. In the UK, very fragmented, and there's not so much work going on in academia, and certainly not within digital forensics laboratories where people have time to do basic research.
Sorry, the specialist journals exist.
Can you allow Mr. Stokes to finish, please?
So I think the challenge is research and development and peer-reviewed publications need both come jointly and from academia and digital forensics lab, but also within digital forensics labs. Probably the bit that's missing is the guidance from the front of the business. What research do we need to focus on? And then having the capacity within digital forensics lab to work with academia in the UK to produce that research work and that ground truth data and that understanding of tools,
and how would that
techniques and interpretation.
How can that be made to happen? Or do you think it's important that it happens in the UK, or are you content that it happens elsewhere in the world?
We were leaders at one time, certainly within traditional forensic science, and we started to lead in digital forensic science at one point. Digital forensic science has, across the world, grown up slightly differently to traditional forensic science. To answer your question directly, it needs more funding and it needs central coordination. Okay. I don't have the answers to either of those as I sit here.
More opportunity to publish as well, because what tends to happen is that these academic journals turn into a bit of a club. So it can be quite
Is there a journal of forensic science?
I beg his pardon?
Is there a journal of forensic science?
There's lots of journals of various aspects of forensic science.
I'm on the board of two of them.
Okay, I got the answer. Now, this last question is important, and we need each of you to give an answer. Baroness Neville-Jones.
This is precisely my approach, Chairman, I agree. Quite a lot of disagreement, it seems to me, among the witnesses. And so you may have different answers to this question, which is, if you've got to make one recommendation in what seems to me to be, in many respects, rather an unsatisfactory situation, one recommendation which would have great impact in improving the quality of forensic science and its ability to contribute to the delivery of justice, what would it be?
Just one. More funding.
Life is a matter of priorities, so which is the one?
Funding. It needs more funding.
Funding.
Mm-hmm. Funding for what?
Across the board. Research and development, coordination, training, including that the judiciary, where they could have access to knowledge and information as we've described. All of those things need funding and putting in place and need people behind them.
And where would you start then in your funding? I mean, where would you want to put the money first?
At the moment, in digital forensics within England and Wales, the capacity to undertake what we're required through criminal investigations is not there. We've currently got 7-month backlogs. We're reducing some of those backlogs by outsourcing, but we've described the mobile phone with 1 terabyte of data, huge amounts of data. You need to invest in the capacity and training to be in place to meet the demand. It cannot meet the demand as we currently are.
I would go back to what I was saying about, again, a training really. If the system's going to be that ordinary police officers are being asked to download information off digital equipment, they ought to know at least how to do it in a way that's not going to foul the evidence, in a way that's not going to put them in a difficult situation when they have to go to court, and that they anybody trying to interpret what comes out of these things actually knows how to interpret it, and it's not being put onto the shoulders of people who can't possibly have had the right amount of training to do that.
Thank you.
I don't disagree with either of those things, but I'd like to raise a separate issue, which is it seems to me that a lot of Home Office policy and forensic science regulation policy has gone on the basis of rather vague anecdotes. Now, your specialist advisor and her colleagues did a rather interesting examination.
No, you're making a recommendation. What would it be?
No, it's a recommendation. The recommendation is to research where things are going wrong with forensic science, rather than just saying it's a scientific problem within labs which can be solved with ISO 17025. And if you look at the whole range, are things going wrong at the specification level? Are they going wrong at the investigator level? Are they going wrong at the disclosure level?
Okay.
And the little bit of research
Okay.
done, not very much. We need to do more, otherwise we don't know how to spend our money.
Okay. Lord Mayor, did you have a burning question?
No.
You don't. Because I ignored you earlier on. Sorry about that. I didn't. Well, we've gone on a bit longer, but thank you very much. It's been an interesting and a heated discussion. You clearly might go in the corner somewhere now and see what you agree with. But thank you very much for coming today, and we much appreciate it.